I, 34M, paid off the remaining $42,000 on our mortgage 3 weeks ago, got a massive promotion at work, senior operations manager came with a bonus that covered most of it, and I drained part of our joint savings to cover the rest. I did it as a surprise for my wife Maisie, 32F. We'd been married 7 years. I thought we were solid. I thought I was doing the best thing I'd ever done for us. If you're still reading, buckle up, because what happened next has completely destroyed the version of my life I thought I was living. So a little background. Maisie and I got together when I was 26 and she was 24. We met through her brother Bradley, 36M, who I'd been close with since college. Bradley and I were tight, gym together 3 times a week, watched every game together, helped each other move apartments twice. When I started dating his sister, Bradley was the one who told me to go for it, said I was the only guy he'd ever trust with her. That mattered to me. I came from a family where loyalty meant something. My parents, Archibald, 62M, and Alana, 59F, had been married 38 years and never once did I hear either of them talk about leaving. That was the standard I held myself to. Maisie was different from anyone I'd dated. She was direct, opinionated, never played games, or so I believed. She worked part-time as a dental receptionist when we got married, and about 2 years in she stopped working entirely. I didn't push it because I was making enough. She handled the house stuff, I handled the money. We bought our place, a 3-bedroom in a decent suburb outside the city when I was 29. The mortgage was $238,000. For 5 years, every single payment came from my income. Every single one. Here's where Maisie's attitude started shifting. And I need you to understand this didn't happen overnight. Around year 4 of our marriage, she started making comments. Little things at first. She'd tell her friend Tessa, 33F, on the phone that she wished I made more, or that she was embarrassed we didn't have a nicer car. I overheard that one in the kitchen while she was on the back porch, and when I brought it up, she told me I was being paranoid and eavesdropping. After that, I started paying closer attention. She began comparing us to Tessa's husband, Christopher, 35M, who worked in tech sales and had just bought a boat. Every conversation circled back to what Christopher had that I didn't. New kitchen, better neighborhood, trips to Cancun twice a year. It was constant. I kept my head down. I worked harder, got certified in project management on top of my regular role, started pulling 55-hour weeks. And when the promotion came through in March, the first thing I did was calculate exactly what we owed on the house. $42,187. I called the bank, confirmed the payoff amount, and scheduled the payment for the following Thursday. I even had a bottle of wine ready. I was going to tell Maisie that evening, hand her the confirmation letter, and say we own our home free and clear. Thursday came. I got home around 6. Maisie wasn't there. She was at Tessa's place. I set up the dining table, put the letter in an envelope on her plate, opened the wine. She got back around 8:30. I told her I had something to show her and handed her the envelope. She read the payoff confirmation and her reaction was fine. She hugged me, said, "That's great, babe," and then went to take a shower. That was it. 5 years of payments, $238,000 of my income, and I got a hug and a shower. I sat at that table alone with the wine, and I told myself I was being ungrateful for wanting more of a reaction. Then at around 10 p.m., I was in the hallway heading to bed, and I heard Maisie on FaceTime in the guest room with the door mostly closed. She was talking to Tessa, and what I heard rearranged my entire understanding of the last 7 years of my life. Maisie was laughing, full-on laughing. She told Tessa something along the lines of, now that the house is paid off, she doesn't have to feel guilty anymore, that she can finally leave and take everything. Tessa asked her something I couldn't fully hear, and Maisie responded that the house is in both their names, that she'd been waiting for this specifically, and that her plan was to file after the summer so she'd have the house fully free and could push for spousal support since she hadn't worked in years. She called me a workhorse. She said, and I am paraphrasing because I was shaking with rage, that I was useful, but she had never really been attracted to me, that Bradley had basically talked her into dating me because I was stable and she was tired of dating guys who didn't have jobs. I stood in that hallway for what was probably 4 minutes. Then I walked to the bedroom, got into bed, and stared at the ceiling. The next morning I acted completely normal, made coffee, kissed her on the forehead before I left for work, and I want to be clear about something. I was not calm. I was furious. But I understood something that Maisie clearly didn't, that the next few weeks were going to determine the rest of both our lives, and I was not going to be the idiot who tips his hand before the cards are played. That Friday, I called my father. Archibald is a retired contractor who spent 30 years dealing with property disputes, liens, and real estate closings. I told him everything, every word I heard. And my father, the most measured man I've ever known, told me three things. He told me to get a lawyer before Monday. He told me to pull every financial record I had access to. And he told me not to touch the joint account yet because the moment money moves, Maisie would know something was wrong. By Sunday night, I had a consultation booked with a divorce attorney for Monday morning, a full spreadsheet of every dollar I'd earned and paid toward the mortgage, and a plan that Maisie had absolutely no idea was coming. But here's the part that still makes me lose sleep. I also called Bradley, because Bradley was my best friend. And when I told him what Maisie said, that she'd been pushed into dating me because I was stable, Bradley went quiet for about 10 seconds and then told me I must have misheard her, that Maisie would never say that, and that I needed to talk to her before doing anything drastic. He didn't deny it. He didn't say it wasn't true. He just said, I misheard. That's when I knew Bradley was in on it from the start. And that's when the plan got bigger. I'll update soon. I need to figure out how much I'm comfortable sharing because what happened next involves Bradley's living situation, my mother Alana getting involved in a way nobody expected, and a conversation with Christopher that changed everything. Okay, so I gotta be real. This man sat at a dining table he set up with wine and a whole envelope presentation like it's a marriage proposal part 2. And this woman said, "That's great, babe," and walked away like he told her the dishwasher was fixed. $238,000 of this man's life. And she gave him the same energy you'd give a coworker who tells you they brought donuts. But like, okay, the actual gut punch here isn't even Maisie, it's Bradley. Because everybody's focused on the scheming wife angle, but let's talk about what kind of person looks at their best friend. Someone they lift weights with 3 times a week, someone who helped them move, and thinks, yeah, he'd make a good financial host for my sister to latch onto. That's not friendship, that's farming. Bradley was raising livestock and this man thought they were brothers. And the, you must have misheard response? That's not a denial, that's a confession wearing a trench coat. A real friend hears that accusation and goes ballistic, defending themselves. Bradley went quiet for 10 seconds because he was calculating, not processing. 10 seconds of silence from a guilty man sounds very different from 10 seconds of silence from a shocked one. And Archibald, retired contractor dad who immediately goes into tactical mode? That man has been waiting for a reason to deploy 30 years of real estate warfare knowledge. Archibald didn't raise a workhorse. He raised a man who was about to become the whole cavalry. Update 1. All right, I'm back. A lot of you had questions after my first post, and I appreciate every single comment and DM. Some of you told me to just leave and move on. I respect that perspective, but that is not what happened. What Maisie and Bradley did to me wasn't just a betrayal, it was a 7-year setup, and I was not about to walk away and let them profit from it. So here's what went down after that weekend. Monday morning, I was at the divorce attorney's office at 8 a.m. sharp. My dad Archibald came with me. The attorney's name doesn't matter, but what she told me in that first hour matters a lot. She said that in our state, the house being in both names meant Maisie had a legal claim to it regardless of who paid the mortgage. That hit hard. But then she asked me one question that changed the entire trajectory of this situation. She asked me whether the $42,000 payoff came from joint funds or solely from my bonus. I told her the bonus covered about $31,000 and the remaining $11,000 came from joint savings. She told me that distinction was going to be critical because my bonus was earned income deposited before Maisie could argue it was marital property if I could prove the timeline right. She also told me that Maisie's lack of employment for nearly 5 years, combined with no children and no documented medical reason for not working, actually weakened her spousal support claim significantly. Not eliminated it, but weakened it. I left that office with a list of things I needed to gather: bank statements, pay stubs, the mortgage payment history, and proof that every single payment for 7 years came from my direct deposits. My dad offered to help me organize everything at his place that weekend, and I agreed because I could not risk doing any of this at home. Now, here's where Bradley comes in, and this is the part a lot of you asked about. Bradley had been living in a duplex on the east side of the city for about 3 years. What most people didn't know, including me until about a year prior, was that Bradley's landlord was our mutual friend Christopher's uncle. Christopher mentioned it casually one night when a group of us were at his place watching a playoff game. He said something about how Bradley was 2 months behind on rent, and that his uncle was getting frustrated. I filed that away and didn't think much of it at the time, but after what I heard on that FaceTime call, after Bradley's non-denial about pushing Maisie toward me, I started connecting things. See, Bradley had been broke for years. He worked inconsistent gig work, drove for a delivery app, and picked up odd labor jobs when he could. Maisie used to send him money regularly. I knew about some of it, small amounts here and there. She told me it was to help her brother out with groceries or a phone bill. I never questioned it. But after I overheard that FaceTime call, I went back through our joint bank statements at my dad's house that Saturday and found that over the past 3 years, Maisie had transferred over $14,000 to Bradley through a payment app. $14,000 from an account funded exclusively by my paycheck. So not only did Bradley engineer me into a relationship with his sister, knowing she wasn't genuinely interested, he was also being financially supported by my income the entire time. I was bankrolling the guy who set me up. Let that sink in for a second because I had to sit with that realization for an entire weekend and still go home Sunday night and act normal. Now, let me tell you about the conversation with Christopher, because this is where a second front opened up. I texted Christopher that following Wednesday and asked if he wanted to grab lunch. We worked about 20 minutes from each other, so it wasn't unusual. We met at a taco place near his office. I didn't plan on telling him everything, but I needed to ask him something specific. I asked him if Tessa ever talked about Maisie's plans. Christopher looked confused at first, and then he got real quiet. He told me that Tessa had been acting weird for months, spending a lot of time on the phone with Maisie, and that he'd asked Tessa about it a few times. Tessa always told him it was just girl talk, but Christopher said something that I hadn't expected. He told me that about 6 weeks ago, Tessa had asked him a very specific question about how divorce settlements work when one spouse pays the entire mortgage. He thought she was asking because of a show she was watching. She was not asking about a show. So now, I had confirmation that this wasn't some impulsive comment Maisie made to Tessa on FaceTime. Tessa was actively helping Maisie research how to take the house from me. This was coordinated. This was planned. And Tessa had been using Christopher's knowledge, he had a business degree and dealt with contracts at work, to gather information without him even realizing he was contributing to it. Christopher was angry. Not at me, at Tessa. He told me he was going to confront her that night. I told him to hold off because if Tessa found out that I knew, she'd immediately warn Maisie and my entire legal strategy would collapse before I could execute it. Christopher agreed to wait, but I could tell he was barely holding it together. He kept saying he couldn't believe Tessa would involve him like that without telling him what it was actually for. So by the end of that week, I had 3 separate problems running at the same time. My wife was actively planning to divorce me and take a house I paid for entirely. My best friend had manipulated me into the marriage in the first place and had been draining my bank account through my wife for years. And my wife's best friend had weaponized her own husband's expertise to help plan the whole thing. And now that husband was sitting on information that could blow the entire thing open at any moment. Meanwhile, I was still going home every night, eating dinner with Maisie, watching TV with Maisie, sleeping next to Maisie. And she had no idea. She was still operating on her summer timeline. She thought she had months. She didn't. But here's the complication I didn't see coming. My mother, Alana, somehow figured out something was wrong. Not the details, she didn't know about the FaceTime call or the lawyer. But mothers know. She called me that Thursday and told me she'd run into Maisie at a grocery store on Elm Street and that Maisie had been cold to her, barely said hello, and was with Bradley, who also acted strange. My mom asked me point blank if everything was okay with my marriage. I told her everything was fine because I wasn't ready to bring her in yet. But Alana is not a woman who accepts surface answers. She told me she was going to invite Maisie and Bradley over for a family dinner that Sunday to see for herself, and I could not talk her out of it. So now I had a ticking clock. Christopher was barely holding back from confronting Tessa. My mother was about to put Maisie and Bradley in a room and start asking questions. And I still hadn't finished preparing my legal position. $14,000. See, the small amounts thing is what gets me because that's exactly how you bleed someone dry without them noticing. You don't take a chunk, you take drips. Grocery money here, phone bill there, and over 3 years it adds up to a number that would make most people's stomachs drop. And Bradley, this dude is behind on his own rent by months, while simultaneously being subsidized by the man he conned into marrying his sister. Like at some point you have to step back and admire the sheer audacity of the ecosystem these people built. Maisie doesn't work, funnels money to Bradley. Bradley doesn't really work either. Tessa is mining her own husband's brain for legal strategy like he's a free consultation. Everybody in this little circle is extracting value from someone who trusts them. It's not a friend group, it's a pyramid scheme with feelings. And Christopher, sitting at that taco place having his whole reality dismantled over a burrito? Brother, welcome to the club. Membership is pain and the dues are everything you thought you knew about your wife. But honestly, what impresses me most is this man's composure. Going home every night and eating dinner across from someone who is actively plotting to rob you, sleeping next to them, kissing them on the forehead in the morning. That takes a level of discipline that most people simply do not have. Most guys hear that FaceTime call and they're flipping tables within the hour. This man went full chess grandmaster. He's thinking 6 moves ahead while everyone else is still setting up the board. Update 2. I know a lot of you have been waiting for this one. Shout out to the commenter who told me to make sure Christopher didn't go rogue before I was ready. You were absolutely right to worry about that. So my mother Alana had decided she was hosting a Sunday dinner and invited Maisie and Bradley. I couldn't stop it without raising suspicion. Archibald knew everything and tried to talk her out of it. Said I had work stress and maybe we should postpone. But Alana had already texted Maisie directly and she'd accepted. I think Maisie said yes because she was still playing the role. She needed my family to think everything was normal until she filed in the summer. Sunday came. Maisie and I drove over together. Bradley showed up 30 minutes late. Here's what you need to understand about this dinner. Every single person at that table except my mother was hiding something. Archibald knew my plan. Maisie was hiding her divorce timeline. Bradley was hiding that he'd steered his sister toward me like I was a retirement fund. And I was hiding that I knew all of it. Dinner went fine for about 20 minutes. Then, Alana started asking Maisie about work, whether she'd thought about going back to the dental office or trying something new. Maisie gave a vague answer about maybe something part-time. Then Alana turned to Bradley and asked about his delivery app work. He mumbled about having prospects. And then Alana said something that shifted everything. She said her and Archibald had been discussing retirement planning, and they'd been considering putting their house, fully paid off, worth around $380,000, into a family trust with me as the primary beneficiary. I didn't know she was going to say that. My dad's face told me he didn't either. But Alana had clearly been thinking about it and decided this was the time. Bradley sat up straighter. He started asking questions about what a family trust meant, who would be included, whether it covered just the property or other assets. Bradley was suddenly very interested in my parents' financial future. Maisie watched him with this look of alertness, like two people doing the same math and arriving at the same number. Bradley wasn't asking out of family love. He was scoping the terrain. If Maisie divorced me and got a favorable settlement, anything financially tied to me could potentially be in play. After dinner, Bradley caught me in the hallway and told me we should talk about what I'd overheard on that FaceTime call. He said Maisie had been going through a hard time emotionally. She didn't mean it, and I should focus on working things out. He said marriage is about forgiveness. This guy who pushed his sister to date me because I was stable, who'd been collecting $14,000 of my money through her for 3 years, looked me in the eye and told me marriage is about forgiveness. I told him I appreciated his perspective. Because here's what Bradley didn't know. The next morning, my attorney filed a motion to reclassify the mortgage payoff. That $31,000 from my bonus was being documented as a separate asset contribution, not a marital gift. My lawyer said it wouldn't guarantee anything alone, but combined with 7 years of mortgage payments, showing zero contribution from Maisie, it built a strong case that the payoff was made under false pretenses while she was actively planning to take the house. But that wasn't my only move. That same week, I called Christopher's uncle, Bradley's landlord. I introduced myself and asked if Bradley still owed back rent. The uncle said Bradley was 4 months behind, nearly $5,200, and he'd been considering starting eviction proceedings, but Bradley kept promising the money was coming. I thanked him, and that was it. I didn't ask him to evict Bradley. I just confirmed the information and made sure the uncle understood that Bradley's promises about money coming soon were exactly that, promises. Within 4 days, Bradley got a formal notice to pay the full balance or vacate within 30 days. He called Maisie panicking, and she tried to transfer him $1,500 from our joint account. But I'd already put a dual authorization requirement on any transfer over $500 from the joint account. Completely legal as a joint holder. The transfer got flagged and held. Maisie called me at work furious, saying the bank was having some kind of glitch. I told her I was in meetings and would look at it tomorrow. She had no idea I was the reason, and Bradley had no idea the landlord's sudden urgency wasn't a coincidence. That night, Christopher texted me. Tessa had asked him another question about property law, whether a spouse can claim a house if they contributed to upkeep, but not mortgage payments. Christopher answered her, then asked point-blank why she kept asking about divorce scenarios. Tessa got defensive and said she was helping a coworker going through a rough patch. Christopher didn't believe her. He texted me, I don't know how much longer I can do this, man. That made 2 of us. But I was almost ready. My attorney was preparing the full filing. My father had helped me organize every receipt, every bank transfer, every pay stub. And I had one more thing to do before I pulled the trigger. A conversation with Maisie directly, face to face. Next update is the last one. And yeah, it's the one where she showed up screaming in a bathrobe. Bradley telling this man marriage is about forgiveness while standing in his parents' hallway might be the most insane thing I've ever heard in one of these stories. Like the nerve required to dispense marriage advice to the person you financially exploited for 7 years. That's not audacity, that's performance art. Bradley should be doing TED Talks on confidence because the man has nothing. No stable income, 4 months behind on rent, couch surfing trajectory, and he's still standing there coaching other people on how to handle relationships. And the way he perked up when Alana mentioned the family trust, you could practically hear the calculator app opening in his brain. $380,000 property goes into a trust with OP as beneficiary. And suddenly, Bradley the philosopher who barely works wants to know the fine print of estate planning. Come on. And then the dual authorization move on the joint account. That's surgical. Maisie tries to send Bradley a lifeline and the money just doesn't go. She calls it a bank glitch. A glitch. Meanwhile, her husband is sitting in his office knowing exactly why that transfer is sitting in limbo, and he tells her he'll look at it tomorrow. Tomorrow. This man is operating with the patience of someone who knows the ending of the movie while everyone else is still in Act 2. But I also gotta say, Alana dropping that family trust bomb at dinner without telling anyone, including Archibald, is absolutely elite mom behavior. She didn't know the details yet, but her instincts were screaming, and she basically threw a financial grenade on the table just to watch who flinched. And guess who flinched? The two people who had been treating her son like an ATM with a heartbeat. Final update. This is the last one. I've read every comment, every DM, and I want to say thank you to this community because some of you gave me advice I actually used. You know who you are. So here's what happened. The Wednesday after that Sunday dinner, I came home from work early, around 3 p.m. Maisie was in the living room on the couch scrolling her phone. I sat down across from her and told her we needed to talk. She immediately asked what was wrong, and I could see her starting to calculate like she was scanning for what I might know. I told her I was going to ask her one question and I needed the truth. I asked her if she had ever, at any point during our marriage, planned to leave me once the house was paid off. She did not hesitate. She told me no, that was ridiculous, that she loved me. And where would I even get an idea like that? She said I'd been acting weird for weeks and maybe I needed to talk to someone. Classic deflection. Not once did she ask why I was asking that specific question. A person with nothing to hide would have asked why. She went straight to denial and then tried to flip it onto me. So I told her I heard the FaceTime call with Tessa. All of it. The laughing, the plan to file after summer, the house, the spousal support strategy, and the part where she said Bradley talked her into dating me because I was stable. I laid it all out. Calm, factual, no yelling. Maisie's strategy shifted instantly. She went from denial to damage control in about 5 seconds. She told me I took it out of context, that she was venting to Tessa and didn't mean any of it, that every wife complains about their husband sometimes and it doesn't mean anything. She said Tessa had been putting ideas in her head about how she deserved more and that she got caught up in it, but she would never actually leave. She blamed Tessa entirely. She told me Tessa was jealous of what we had and had been poisoning her thinking for months. She never once apologized, not once. She just kept reshaping the narrative to make herself the victim of Tessa's influence. I let her talk for about 15 minutes. Then I told her about the $14,000 she'd sent to Bradley from our joint account over the past 3 years. She got very still. She said it was just helping her brother, small amounts here and there, nothing major. I told her I had the exact transaction history, every transfer, dates, and amounts, and that it totaled $14,000. She started arguing that it was her right to help her family, that the money was in a joint account which made it hers too. I told her the joint account was funded entirely by my paycheck since she hadn't worked in 5 years. That's when she got angry for real. She told me I always held money over her head, that this was exactly why she'd been unhappy because I treated everything like a transaction. She said Bradley was right about me, that I was controlling and obsessive about finances. And there it was. She said Bradley was right about me, meaning Bradley had been talking about me to her, framing me as the problem. The entire time he was eating at my table and taking my money. I told Maisie I had already filed for divorce. Her face changed completely. She asked me when. I told her my attorney filed that Monday. She started saying I couldn't do that we needed to talk about this, that I was making a huge mistake and throwing away 7 years. I told her she threw away 7 years the night she laughed about taking everything I built. I told her my attorney had documented every mortgage payment, the bonus payoff reclassification, and the $14,000 in transfers to Bradley. I told her that her 5-year gap in employment with no medical reason and no children significantly reduced any spousal support claim. I told her I had already separated my direct deposit into a new individual account as of that Monday, which I had every legal right to do once filing was initiated. She grabbed her phone and called Bradley. Right in front of me. She told him I knew everything and that I'd already filed. I could hear Bradley on the other end asking her what she meant by everything. She told him about the FaceTime call, the transfers, all of it. Bradley started going off about how I was blowing things out of proportion. Maisie told him to come over. I told her that wasn't going to happen because I was the one leaving. I had already packed 2 bags that morning and put them in my car before work. I walked out and drove to my parents' house. My mother, Alana, was in the kitchen when I arrived, and she took one look at me and knew. I told her and Archibald the full story that night. Alana was furious, not at me, at Maisie and Bradley. And the first thing she said was that the family trust discussion from Sunday dinner suddenly made a lot more sense, that Bradley's interest in it wasn't casual at all. The next 10 days were chaos. Christopher finally confronted Tessa and told her he knew she'd been helping Maisie research how to take my house. Their marriage blew up. Tessa called Maisie, blaming her for dragging her into it. Maisie called me 4 times a day for the first week, trying to negotiate, then threatening, then begging. She told me she'd go back to work, that she'd cut Bradley off, that we could do counseling. I didn't respond to any of it. My lawyer handled all communication. Bradley's landlord followed through on the eviction. 30 days came and went and Bradley couldn't pay. Without Maisie funneling him my money, he had nothing. He called me once, the only time we spoke after that Sunday dinner. He told me I was ruining his sister's life and his life over a conversation I wasn't even supposed to hear. I told him I heard exactly what I needed to hear, and that every dollar he'd taken from that joint account was going to be part of the divorce filing. He called me ungrateful. Ungrateful. 3 weeks after I moved out, Maisie showed up at my parents' house on a Saturday morning. She was in a bathrobe, hair still wet from a shower, screaming from the driveway. She kept yelling that I took everything, that the joint account was frozen, that Bradley was getting evicted, that Tessa wasn't speaking to her anymore, and that this wasn't fair. My mother walked outside and told her to leave. Maisie wouldn't. She stood in the driveway for 20 minutes screaming until a neighbor came out and Alana told Maisie she had 10 seconds to get in her car or she was calling the police. Maisie left. That was the last time I saw her in person. My divorce is still being processed. My attorney is confident I'll retain primary claim on the house based on sole financial contribution and the reclassified payoff. Maisie's spousal support claim is weak. Bradley is couch surfing at a friend's place after his eviction. Christopher and Tessa are separated. 7 years ago, I paid for a ring, a wedding, a house, and a life with a woman who saw me as a workhorse. I paid off the mortgage as a gift, and she laughed about taking it all. She's not laughing now. That's it. That's the whole story. Thanks for reading. So the first thing she does when the walls close in is call Bradley. Not a lawyer, not her mom, not anyone with actual authority or solutions. She calls the guy who's couch surfing and 4 months behind on rent. She calls her accomplice. And like, okay, I need to talk about the negotiation to threatening to begging pipeline, because that tells you everything about who Maisie actually is. First, it was, let's talk about this. Then, it was threats. And when threats didn't work, she went to, I'll go back to work. I'll cut Bradley off, we can do counseling. She offered to do in 3 desperate phone calls what she refused to do in 5 years of marriage. She could have worked this entire time. She could have been a partner this entire time. But it only became worth doing when the free ride ended. And Bradley calling this man ungrateful. Brother, ungrateful for what? For being selected as a host organism? For the privilege of funding your sister's exit strategy and your rent simultaneously? The absolute delusion of someone who contributed nothing to anything, telling the person who paid for everything that they're ungrateful. That word alone tells you Bradley never once saw this man as a friend. He saw a resource that was malfunctioning. And then the bathrobe scene. Standing in a driveway in a bathrobe, hair still wet, screaming that it's not fair. You know what's wild about that moment? For 7 years, Maisie played the long game. Patient, calculating, waiting for the mortgage to clear. And the second her plan collapsed, she couldn't even get dressed before driving to her in-laws' house to scream in their driveway. All that composure, all that scheming, all that I'll file after summer energy, gone. Because the person she spent 7 years underestimating turned out to be smarter, more prepared, and more disciplined than she ever gave him credit for. She called him a workhorse, and yeah, maybe he was. But this particular workhorse learned to read the contract.